This is something that, maybe not to this extreme, but I think a lot of people deal with in some form or fashion. And that is, she calls it, or he calls it, his wife's financial infidelity. And so, there's a lot of ways to think about that, but finances is are or are one of the most important places for a couple to have alignment with, because when you're married, right, and this all of this kind of becomes one, or more than kind of becomes one, you throw your lives together, and the finances are kind of part of the fuel that makes everything run, that supplies energy to be able to do and build what you want to build in your life. And when you're going two different directions in there and you're not aligned there, that's a big deal. And so I always tell couples to, monitor and think about and look at your financial alignment. And that's something that's really, really important about getting on the same page. Now, remember also, let me give you a couple of principles here, that a marriage really, when it comes to the finances or anything else, a marriage really has three stakeholders. And so there's three parties that have to have something coming from that bank account and that budget. There's three different parties that have to get fed from that. Number one, and the most important, is the marriage, the relationship. And so there's things that, we spend our money for us, like your home or your apartment or wherever it is you live. You're building a life there, and that's a we thing. And so that comes out of there, and a bunch of other stuff that, all of your stuff that supports us and our life together. That's one stakeholder. But then there's two other stakeholders. There's a husband and a wife, right? And so they each have to get something out of there because they have needs too. And so when couples look at this whole thing, it's really, really important to decide how much goes here, how much goes there, and how much goes there. And then there's no control, right? You don't have to worry about it. Once you've decided it's $10, I don't care how you spend it, right? Or you don't care how I spend my 10. But we're aligned about that. And things like giving, how do you come together for your giving? Um, I sort of say a big believer. It's more than like belief. It's like I can't imagine even thinking another way. All of the research, if you don't get scientific about it, all the research says that you will be happier, you will be more fulfilled, you'll be less depressed, lots of good things will happen. Your immune functioning will change if you are a giver. And I always hear people say, "Oh, I'd like to make, when I start making some money and I really start making, because I want to do that because I want to give." Never happens, basically. People that are givers are givers, and if they're making, very little bit, they're giving a little of the little, and then as they grow, they give more of the grow. But giving is basically kind of in the stuff of who somebody is, and so I would suggest you jump on that train and get alignment with your spouse about that, as well as other stuff. Life's got to be balanced, hobbies, and spending some time on something you like. Okay, so now the question: how can you coexist with a divisive? Whoops, that's not the one. That's another question. A divisive daughter-in-law. That's fun. I've been dealing with my wife's financial infidelity for the past 15 years. Marriage counseling, or financial classes have not stopped her. I have a self-employed business that she keeps taking money from after her monthly allowance runs out. So it sounds like they've divided up the budget, and the business, pays her a certain amount for her to go do whatever she needs to do. I warned her that I would take away her access to the business if she continues to exceed the budget. She told me if I do that, I will not see my kids anymore. We just went from a discussion to war. I mean, come on. I won't see my kids anymore. This is way more than finances here, buddy. I'm sorry. I'm stuck between fear of her ruining my business and the fear of her leaving and taking the kids if I draw a hard line. Please help. Um, so here's what here's what I would say. I think that that you are thinking correctly about this, that whenever somebody is out of control, okay, and they're not taking responsibility for their own actions and their own choices, then that is number one when we step in and try to help them, okay, which you've done. You're talking about counseling and talking to her and this and the other, but she's not facing this problem and she's still in denial about her overspending. Well, that's one thing if it's somebody's own house that they're doing that in. But what you're talking about here, this is a classic boundaries scenario where her out of control behavior. Now, your household and your business, which fuels both of your lives together, you say, is at risk because she's out of control. Now, you guys are experiencing the collateral damage of that. And that's why I say you're thinking about this right, where you have to say, look, we have an agreement here, and we're going to commit to this agreement. And, sounds like she's done that. And it's very clear we have mutually agreed upon expectations that if you exceed this, then you are not going to get any more. In fact, your access is going to be cut off. So I think that's a great way to think about this. Now, whenever we have really good, reasonable limits and boundaries to protect ourselves, and somebody gets retaliatory, which she says, "I'm going to retaliate by taking the kids away from you." Okay, number one, have you ever heard you ever heard the term? You don't negotiate with terrorists. Why? Well, because it doesn't help, basically. Okay, and so if somebody has character issues to the point that they would deprive their own children of their father, then that's not a reasonable, logical discussion about money anymore. Okay, it's not even a reasonable, logical discussion about co-parenting anymore. And it's a classic, re- retaliatory. I don't know any other way to, it's a counter strike. So she sees this as persecutory, which means she sees it as you're doing something to her. So she's going to do something back to you. Well, you're not doing anything to her. Okay. She's doing something to herself because there haven't any limits. She hasn't um, experienced that. So I think you have a much bigger issue uh, than the finances here. There's a serious breakdown in the oneness and the unity of the relationship. It sounds like in large part because of some of her character issues. So what I would do is tell her, you know, we can't continue to go spending more than we can spend or we're going to be out of business. Okay, so we have a financial issue, but when I told you that and you threatened me with the kids, it's made me aware that we have a much bigger problem and we're not on the same page. And so if that's the level it's gotten to, then I would make a demand. I'd say I'm going to have to solve this financial problem one way or the other. I would like for us to work it out together, and we're going to go to marriage counseling. And so I want you to go, and in that, I want you to talk about the whole picture now. And basically, to your question about the fear of her leaving and taking the kids, um, I typically, this is like when you do an intervention with an alcoholic or an addict, they're always going to threaten a lot of things. And sometimes they even follow through, and she may even, separate and go that route. But I don't think that that's the kind of manipulation and stuff you give into. I think you hold your boundary and say, well, you could do that. That would be really, really hurtful if you chose to do that. I would rather us go to the counselor together and figure out how we're going to do this and figure out the bigger issue of how did we get so sideways. So I would treat it as a marriage problem, not just a finance problem.